The October the 7th atrocity was an event that was simply unspeakable, of utter barbarity. And as we know, the barbarity is continuing, with 6 hostages viciously executed by Hamas on the point of their rescue by IDF forces. I absolutely understand why the people of Israel and Jewish people all around the world are focused on what's happening on their own borders. But we do need to put all of this in a wider global context. What's obvious, and has been obvious for some time, is that discontented dictatorships are attempting to revise the world order, which they believe has treated them unfairly and unjustly. We have the Islamist dictatorship in Tehran that is using its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, with the objective, ultimately, of wiping out the Jewish state, of creating a new Holocaust, and obviously establishing the Shia Iranian dominance of the Middle East. But that's not the only serious challenge. We've got the militarist dictatorship in Moscow, and of course, arguably the worst of them all, the communist dictatorship in Beijing. They are working together in a loose coalition of Beijing. They are working together in a loose coalition of convenience to try to derange the world order, the Pax Britannica of old, the Pax Americana more recently, under which the world has been more free, more fair, more safe, and more peaceful for more people than at any other time in history. So what do we do? Well, obviously, we've got to work to support those countries that are under threat. Plainly, we need to do whatever we can as freedom-loving democracies to support the state of Israel at this time. It disappoints me enormously that people who should know better are effectively engaged in moral nitpicking against the Israeli government and the Israeli armed forces. I'd say to all of those who are currently critical of the Israeli government and the Israeli armed forces, what is your alternative? If only there were an easier way. If only it were possible to deal with reasonable and decent people here. But unfortunately, the reality is that Hamas is an apocalyptic death cult, and the remaining hostages are being used as human shields for the Hamas leadership. So we have to support Israel. We have to support the Ukrainians. And that means supporting the Ukrainians not just not to lose, but actually to win. And we have to support Taiwan, a practically independent liberal democracy of some 25 million people, which is living, breathing proof that there is no totalitarian gene in the Chinese DNA. That's why the commissars in Beijing are so determined to crush Taiwan, and that's why they will do so as soon as they think they can get away with it. And that's why it's so important for the major democracies, obviously the United States, Japan, Australia, but Britain as well, to be active in East Asia, to let the commissars in Beijing know that should it come to it, it won't just be 1.4 billion Chinese against 25 million Taiwanese, but it will effectively be China, if not against the world, at least against a strong democratic partnership. So we have to be on the side of those under threat. We must, as freedom-loving democracies, strengthen our economies, strengthen our militaries, and ultimately strengthen our own self-confidence. For a long time now, under a form of globalisation that has perhaps gone further than it should, we have effectively industrially disarmed. And that must change. One of the obstacles to necessary change here is what I've called the climate cult. Sure, we've got to do what we can to save the planet. But this idea that the most important of all our current missions is somehow reducing our emissions, even if that leaves us economically and strategically weaker against our principal adversaries, makes no sense whatsoever. I know people like to talk about a climate emergency, but compared to a military crisis, the so-called climate emergency is a second-order issue at best. We do need to strengthen our military, which have been run down for the last 30 years because we thought mistakenly after the fall of the Berlin Wall that history had somehow ended. But above all else, there has to be a recovery of self-confidence. Too many of the countries that have been the bastions of freedom are now riddled with self-doubt. America is angsting over slavery. Britain is angsting over the empire and colonisation. Even here in Australia, we are angsting over Indigenous dispossession. The truth is that societies such as ours are as free, as fair, and as prosperous as any on earth. Societies such as ours are as colourblind and as least racist as any countries on earth. It's time we wake up to that fact, and it's time we once more took a stand in favour of democracy, in favour of liberalism, and above all else, in favour of the Judeo-Christian culture which has done so much for the wider world.